Welcome to week 2 Fireside Chat. I have noticed that my collar is not quite level here, so I'm not sure what's going on, but I can assure you I'm sitting pretty straight. So a number of things to cover during week 2. One is child fine. Child fine is not something that happens just once a year. You do have your posting at the start of the year in the newspaper, and then you have your child fine activities typically for your younger kids that might happen in spring, but child fine is all year long. You should have your child fine notice on your district website, and make sure that you have that shared with local hospitals, local daycares. But just if there is concern about potentially a student having a disability, that again, child fine just isn't something that happens on a certain date on a calendar. That's all year long. Make sure you have that up on your website. I'm almost positive that's a requirement. And then list the specific people or person to contact. Even though that might change, and then you're going to have to go in and change it. It's best to say contact, David Proden at this number, or instead of saying contact the student service director or whatever for the district. So that may sound like it creates a lot more work if things change, but please, if possible, try to identify the name of whoever oversees that process. A few things about 504, IDEA, and ADA. I've provided a document, and a document provided by Dr. Teddy Getterman regarding some of the key differences and descriptions about 504, IDEA, and ADA. Just in kind of a summary, my experiences. So 504 largely has to do with access. So 504, for example, is, in easy terms, it's building a ramp so a student can access an entrance. Or 504 plan is making sure that student is always has their classes within a certain distance from a restroom, because of a bladder condition or whatever it might be. But so those are 504 type things. You're not actually doing like a therapy or a treatment. Now we get into the individuals with disability. So again, 504 I look at it is removing a barrier, so the student then can access the curriculum and access the social parts of school. So IDEA, Individuals with Disability Education Act, is very prescribed, and you're probably familiar with that. That's going through, and you do have, actually both for 504 and for IDEA, you have parent rights. 504 falls more under civil rights, OCR, and where the DPI is not going to probably come in and investigate a 504 complaint, that'd be OCR. IDEA comes in, under where DPI would be, and that's where you're going to see IEPs. You're not going to see IEPs in 504. You're going to have 504 plans, which are much more informal and have documents that you can look at. But again, please don't use those documents. They're a little bit antiquated, and that's for a reason, because I don't want you to go in and use them. Make sure if you don't have 504 documents that you work and get 504 documents, and also a process of where you're putting those documents and who's completing those, and that they're annually reviewed and so forth. But IDEA has to do with IEPs and the IEP process, and kids do have due process under that. Due process means that if a parent files a complaint, the DPI can come in and they'll investigate the complaint, but there could actually be a due process procedure where then they check and look at, were invites sent out, with the correct information, the correct timelines, was the IEP held in the correct manner, The DPI isn't going to question the decision of the IEP team. They're not going to overrule and say, you should have come up with this as your outcome versus this. But they're going to look at the process. Now, a parent can request an independent educational eval if they don't agree with the outcome of the team. So if it's a speech language evaluation and the team decided the child didn't qualify, the parent feels the child does have disability, the parent then could request independent eval. The school will have to honor that. There's a process for that. You can find that out. I've only had to go through that, I think, once in my career. It's not very common. But again, idea is it has everything to do with your IEPs, and where you can get tripped up in an idea complaint, and it can be something as simple as if a invite wasn't filled out correctly or a date was wrong on an invite. So the little things do matter. Now, typically if services were provided to a child, there are levels that the DPI looks at as far as like whether it's a major infraction versus a minor infraction or whatever. But if services were provided as a pupil services director, you're probably in pretty good shape. But you want to make sure, though, that you're reviewing IEPs and that you have it as detailed as possible in instructions on how to complete your IEP documents. ADA is the American with Disability Accessibility Act. So ADA has to do with accessible bathrooms and the height of tables, width of hallways, things like that. So one of the things that's interesting about ADA, and ADA and 504 sometimes can come into play, somewhat. A 504 plan could be different. Let's say a child has a condition where, they need to come to school an hour late because of sleep patterns or whatever. I mean, that would be dictated within a 504 plan. I talked about the ramp, but it can also be other things. So, but anyway, let's get on to ADA. So ADA has to do, really with how things are physically accessible and how construction is done. All new schools have, are built much differently than they were years ago. You look outside and, you're walking on sidewalks. Now you see the little dip at the end where it goes down. That's for wheelchair accessibility. That's an ADA requirement. It's interesting, though, because sometimes you'll see renovations made at schools and ADA won't be followed. We actually had this happen. Excuse me. I do have another entire cup of coffee that is this size, 24 ounce, which is right over here. So has 48 ounces of coffee today, which is going to be a lot of coffee. But so you might assume that if you are creating a new learning area or even putting an addition on a building, that people are going to follow ADA compliance. But make sure you have that discussion. Actually, back in the days of ERA dollars or the stimulus dollars, I had spent, oh boy, probably $40,000-$50,000 on having a home economics room, family and consumer ed room, renovate it, update it, and so we would have stations for students with disabilities because there wasn't any way to wheel up and to have workstations. Unfortunately, the work wasn't done to be ADA compliant, so the heights of the stations weren't correct. So actually the builder had to come back in and make corrections after the fact. And if you do have your own maintenance staff doing that, you want to make sure that they understand what that means. If a child using a wheelchair needs to use a restroom or the height of certain rails and things like that, those are very well laid out. Your building and maintenance people are going to be the folks to go to on that. So But those are the differences, and ADA is federal, 504 federal, IDEA federal, but that really gets examined through the DPI if there's a complaint. So transportation, here's something that also comes into play. So ADA and transportation. If students that have a wheelchair need to be transported, to and from school, and also to and from school activities, in a wheelchair accessible van. So if you're taking a field trip, all of the 4th grade, and this student has muscular dystrophy and they use a wheelchair, you can't say, too bad, you can't go, or you can go if mom and dad bring you in their van. No, you have to transport that student. I mean, you can do a separate van, but that student has to be able to come along on that trip, and you cannot put that responsibility on the parents. And also make sure that when you're transporting that you have ADA compliant seat belts, and if you're having a wheelchair, that they have the proper tie downs and the straps. If you're contracting with a company, check with the company, the bus company, that they're doing that. If you have your own bus service, make sure that you check that you're compliant in that, because I have seen a number of bizarre things, such as kind of just cradle type seats, which are made more for physical therapy, that get modified and then put into a bus, to things that are strollers, which are not meant to be strapped down, getting put in and being strapped down in buses, and kids being transported in cars and being put in the front seat, yet they're not old enough, and you have airbag, and kids that should be in booster seats, and other things. So just make sure that you have that as a special ed director, that you're going through that. But here's a part that comes into discrimination. And a student with an allergy, let's say a student with a peanut allergy, and you're saying, student can't go along unless the parent goes along, because we don't have a nurse we can send along to administer the EpiPen, and the bus driver's not going to do that. So, but parent, if you come along, that's fine. Well, you can't do that. I guess you could. You could have the parent come along with student as a condition if the parent agreed to that. But you are then responsible for, if that parent makes any mistake in administering the medication or assisting their child, that doesn't default to them, that defaults to you as responsible. So you want to make sure that if you do have a student that does require medical care in school, that if they are going on a field trip, that medical care is provided along on that trip. So do not, cut corners on that. Have a plan, plan B if, if you have someone who's supposed to go that day and can't, and then ultimately, if for some reason in the best interest of the child you can't do that for safety, because, the person that's supposed to go with the child is sick and the parent is unable to go, and whatever, and don't wing it, then just don't do it. And you're probably you're gonna have to have some explanation of the parent, maybe some compensatory type of activity, but you got to be thinking about these types of things. But do not have these conditions where you say, yeah, it's fine, the child can go along, or if it's a child with severe behavioral needs, but the parent has to be with them. You can't do that. And a parent can volunteer, and a parent can drive and take the child on their own and things like that. And again, that's okay unless something happens. And if something happens, it's going to default back to you as being the responsible party. You can check with your attorney on that, but I know I'm almost 100% accurate that that's how that plays out. So a few things, too, we talk about accommodations during this section, different ways to get kids involved in the regular education, classroom, and curriculum, and with peers. There's a ton on Pinterest that wasn't available years ago, so you can find accommodation area, suggestions. You can go to YouTube and see what people have done. One of the things too that you want to be very aware of, for example, in my daughter's school, if a child is going to pass out an invite to a birthday party during the school day, they need to do it for all the students in the class, not just for some. So, for example, because that is viewed as possibly discriminatory. You're not inviting, these students with disability to a birthday party. So you want to also make sure that if you have birthday treats that are being given out, and I do really strongly recommend you don't have parents bring in homemade treats and stuff anymore, just because you cannot guarantee the integrity of the ingredients. Not saying, it's not going to be made properly, but if there's cross-contamination with nuts or some other, allergy type, gluten, some ingredient. But, you need to have an alternative then for a student. So if everyone's celebrating, Sarah's birthday, and then, cupcakes are passed around, but there are 2 students that can't have gluten, so then they don't get anything? No, you have to have some type of alternative so those students are receiving something. So be aware of that, because those are acts of discrimination. Doesn't seem like it, but yeah, and we're seeing that probably happen more and more with food allergies and for special celebratory events. So HIPAA. So one of the things with HIPAA, the Portability Act, so basically medical records. So if you have medical records for a student, those medical records come to you and they should be put in a special folder marked medical records, whether they go in the CUME folder or whether they go inside the special ed folder. But they need to go in a separate location so they can be separated out. You obtain those through a release of information from the doctor, or the parent can give those to you directly. I do not encourage you to ask for those directly from the parent, because a parent can cherry pick those. A parent can give you a report that has maybe doesn't identify the full extent of the needs of the child, where other reports do exist that have that, or they can censor sometimes and leave some things out, so you're getting some piecemeal stuff. So I ask for a release from the doctor and then have that report sent directly to me from the physician. So again, that's very important to think about, and understanding, too, that and parents aren't going to always be cooperative in doing that, and they might revoke, the consent and so forth. But you want to make sure that you're getting those reports from the doctor. Now, if you do have something from a parent, I believe legally you're required to still, consider it. But I really, again, encourage you to get the information firsthand from the doctor. So with that, check out your district's release of information form. It probably makes sense to have your attorney, your school attorney, review that, make sure it's compliant. And a number of places have their own forms. You might have a child, gets outside services at UW. Well, UW wants you to complete their form, and then you want them to complete your form, and whatever. But make sure that you have those forms complete before you have that sharing of information. And another thing is that you want to work with your secretaries and work with staff that if cold calls come in from the outside, that, for example, a secretary isn't sharing information that he or she shouldn't be sharing. Somebody calls and says, yeah, I want to know, something about this child, or whatever, is in their IEP, and, I'm the dad, or I'm the grandfather, or whatever it is. And you want to make sure that you have that release of information. And even if you need a callback number, I mean, even if there's something suspicious, you say, I need to call you back to verify. Because you wouldn't believe the number of times when somebody has given out information which they should not have given out. And just because someone calls in and claims to be affiliated with a child, this can really get to be tricky with custody issues, where one parent is trying to get information, or it could even be, a grandparent or something like that. So, and sometimes, they're not even supposed to know the child is enrolled in school. So if someone says, yeah, they're here, and I actually had that case happen once. So just making sure that everybody in the school, and especially the people who are most common to answer the outside phone calls, know the questions to field and what questions to divert or say. I need to redirect you to our student services director, or to our principal for that question. Anyway, we talked about that HIPAA folder. So that HIPAA folder contains the medical information, and let's say that the child moves to another district. You do not forward that information to the receiving district. That information has only been released to you through that release of information form. So you have that medical report. You can give it to the parent, which I would encourage you to do, is to say, here, give this, these are yours. You can give them to the next district. And then if I was receiving those as the next district, I look at these and say, okay, I need a release, and I want to make sure that I can contact the doctor and also get these reports to make sure that they're the same reports that the parent's giving me. But I give those back to the parents, or else once the child's gone, those need to be shredded. Pull those out and they get shredded. They do not get forwarded. Again, that's another common mistake that people make. I'll receive a file and entire stack of medical reports in there. That you can't do that. Once a child leaves, you have to pull those out. IEP, CUME file that goes for it, but not those. So allergy management, I'll talk about and give some documents, but allergy management is going to be a bigger part of your job than it would have been 10 years ago. It really is growing. I believe it wasn't too long ago, one of the districts around here had something like 25–30% of their kindergarten class with some type of allergy. And we're seeing allergies which are really potentially severe. And the thing with an allergy is, it's called a RAST score, R-E-S-T, and they're not really consistent, but let's say, they test for what your reaction is to, and there can be all kind of allergies, milk, latex, whatever. It might just be a rash. I had a friend that worked at Red Lobster. Everything was fine, and then all of a sudden started to get some rashes, started to actually develop an allergy to seafood, and then one day had an anaphylactic reaction. And so it kind of went from just a rash to this huge event kind of out of the blue. So just because a child has a minor allergy doesn't really mean that the next time they get stung by a bee or whatever, that it's going to be the same reaction. So first of all, you need to know that with an allergy is it can go all over on the RAS score, but you can have situations where you do have a student that has a very severe allergy, let's say a peanut allergy, where if it's if they contact peanut residue or airborne allergies, I mean, I haven't seen as many of those, but let's say it's peanut residue, or eat something with peanuts in it, where they can have an anaphylactic reaction, swell up, and could actually suffocate. So you need to make sure that you understand who has allergies, work with food service on that for your food allergies, work with nursing staff on that. And I have a document that I presented to the school board a couple of years ago, and in that document, I mean, go through it, you can see the type of stuff. I worked with our head of food service, and we put together that to inform the district of how many students we had with allergies, all the different types of allergies, egg allergies, and then how we were being proactive in making sure people were aware of these allergies. And then also, we acquired more EpiPens and trained people on how to use EpiPens. Once you use an EpiPen, I mean, you can buy them like at Walgreens, but they expire, like, I think after a year. It's a good thing. You use the expired ones, take like an orange, and then people can like practice of how to use them and throw them out after that. But EpiPen, once you use it, you need to call 911. That's just an automatic. But one of the things, you can go to typically your school's health insurance provider, so Dean, Unity, GHC, whoever, and they'll often donate EpiPens to your school if you contact them and say, we want EpiPens and could you help us out? I would keep a number of EpiPens in every building and make sure you log them. Have your nursing staff do that in the inventory, and when they expire, you cycle them out. Make sure EpiPens are going on field trips and a number of people know how to use them. I would have an EpiPen in the lunchroom, definitely in the office, in the classroom if a student has an allergic reaction, does have a known allergy. And a number of students, carry their own EpiPens, especially if they're older. Most can self-administer, especially, even after first grade, but, some can't. And so it's, you want to make sure that you're covered with EpiPens. And if there's ever a question in also what an anaphylactic reaction looks like, and having your nursing staff educate your global staff about that, because you might come upon a student and you can see that they might be having anaphylactic reaction. You don't know for sure, but you're going to administer that EpiPen, but just to be on the safe side. But then you may need to make sure that you're contacting 911, because that EpiPen is only going to buy you so much time. So even if a parent doesn't want you to administer the EpiPen, if they say, please call me at work and I'll come and take the child to the hospital or whatever, no, don't do that. I mean, the sequence of event does not go from child having for example, seizure or having anaphylactic response to calling the parent and then calling 911. That's not the sequence. The sequence is to contact EMS first under those type of situations, and then to contact the parent. Now there will be times, if there's some, very minor seizure activity, like staring away or whatever, and you have a medical protocol. But I'm talking if there's something significant, where a parent is saying, always call me first. No, don't. You need, if you feel first a child needs medical attention, you need to do that. And an EpiPen, it's an automatic. That's a medical call. So here's an allergy management story that I'm going to share. First, I'm going to take a little coffee here. So, had an elementary student with a severe peanut allergy, and the parents were very upset that the district was still allowing peanut butter sandwiches to be served as an alternative. Now, it wasn't this child did not have an airborne allergy, so it could be in a lunchroom and could be at a separate peanut-free table. And again, there's some pictures of that in that PowerPoint that was given, and kind of give you an idea. But you got to be sure you don't discriminate there and just say, if you have a peanut allergy, or this is your allergy table for this, or your fish allergy or whatever. You want to make sure that then, let's say that student is at that table, other students get to sit there too, but maybe they have their lunch bags checked or their tray checked by someone working in the cafeteria to make sure it is peanut free, and then they can come over and be with that student. But one of the things that I had was a parent who said, I don't want peanut butter served anymore at all. The head of food service said, well, it's a source of protein. Parents don't have to have it refrigerated. Kids like it. It works well with low-income families, as it's affordable. And we do have cross-contamination processes, procedures in place, and to keep your child, with the peanut allergy safe. So in that case, that was our position as a district, because we felt if we gave that up and went, peanut free and reduced, all peanut butter from the schools, that we were going to have a negative effect on a large number of students that were obtaining that for protein. Now, had we had a situation, where if anything airborne, was causing a reaction with just this child, we'd have to revisit that, of seeing environmentally what we could do, or if we would actually have to get in and maybe not allow peanuts in the school. Now, I strongly recommend you look at, I have a policy from Hudson posted, but you do not become a peanut-free school or latex-free school or whatever. You want to become a peanut-aware school, latex-aware school, all these things of saying, please do not bring these things into our school, here's the reasons, whatever, but you cannot guarantee 100% that you are not going to have these things in your school. So once again, this, you might want to get legal advice on this, but this has always been my what the lawyers have told me is, there was a district that went to be peanut free, completely peanut free in the entire district, because of some students with peanut allergies. What had happened was peanuts were still working their way into the school, because during a basketball game, student might bring it in a pocket of a jacket, or grandparents, someone's coming in for grandparents' day or for some performance. It's just, the fact was that the parents got to the point where they wanted the school to wipe down the door handles, everything that was used in gym class, including basketballs, the seats on the buses, because who knows, that bus went the night before to an away game, got back at midnight. How can you guarantee that there wasn't a student that had a peanut butter sandwich or some type of peanut butter snack? So the district really got overwhelmed, and they couldn't back down from this policy which they had put in place. So they ended up having to put in massive procedures to really ensure that they had a peanut-free environment. Even to that fact, unless you're going through and checking every student's backpack and things like that, which, you're not going to do, but you basically have said, legally, if that went into the court of law, you're saying, yeah, this is peanut-free, when in fact, for a fact, you cannot guarantee that that's a peanut-free environment. You can, guarantee. So if you're peanut aware and taking all the steps to educate and try to do that, that's what you want to do. So look at the Hudson policy, because once you start banning, you ban peanuts, it's not going to be long before you're going to ban 10 other things, and pretty soon it's going to be hard to manage anything within a school. And you'd be surprised at the number of things that have latex in them, for example. But so that's where you have to balance out, discrimination with the student on what you realistically can provide. Now, here was an example too. So I had a parent who had a student that would have an allergic reaction to a bee sting. So we had EpiPens in place and had all that covered. But the bus drivers, we contracted with a bus company. The bus company would not administer EpiPen. So what the parent wanted was for someone to ride the bus and to be able to administer the EpiPen to this child in the event that a bee flew into the bus, child was stung. So for a district, we didn't think that was reasonable. We thought the probability of that was low, and then actually we had other students that were allergic to bee stings, and did that mean now that we would have to have riders on other buses, and at what point does this end? So at some point you have to make a recommendation as a director and with legal consult, but in this case we actually went against legal consult, and legal was telling us, well, yeah, you'd be on the hook if something did happen, this child got stung and you knew that they had this allergy and no one was there to administer an EpiPen. And we looked at it and said, well, we have 30 buses or 30 bus routes. We're we're not going to have someone on every bus at every time in case this happens, for a child. But so in that case, the bus did have a process where if something did happen, they did call 911. We did feel that we would have a fast response time to that, just as if anything else happened, a medical event to a student. We continue to work with the bus company and try to encourage them to administer the EpiPen. And that's one thing as a student service director, I would have gone after that, I think, a little bit stronger when you re-up your bus company contract and your proposals, to put that in your actual request for proposal when you bid that out, of saying must be willing to administer an EpiPen as an absolute condition. But again, we didn't have it. So our attorney brought up some legal case to us of some school in Alabama where this actually did happen. B got on a bus, stung a kid, they had a reaction, and it turned out poorly, and then the district was sued and whatever. Well, one thing about working with your attorneys, every attorney is going to have a different perspective on things. And while, it's a very interesting relationship you're going to have as a pupil services director with your legal counsel, because your legal counsel is trying to weed out any specific circumstance when you might have a liability. And you're going to have to make a judgment call with your administrative team of saying, well, the odds of that happening are so low that, we're not going to do that. For example, put 30 riders on buses all the time to administer an EpiPen in case a bee flies on and stings a child. But so you're going to have some times when you're going to go against what your legal says. And you might want to get a second opinion, and I've done that too, where I've got a second opinion and another lawyer has taken a different approach on things. So you want to be aware, but again, a lot of this stuff isn't black and white. And I'll talk about best interests of the child in a future lecture, but what really happens is the feds kind of give out mandates, and then the states are left to follow those mandates, and then the states push those down to the districts, and then districts come up with policies on how to handle it. And sometimes the districts just filter that right down to the administrative level. Administrators make administrative rules. So a lot of the stuff isn't black and white. It gets defined in courts, over lawsuits, and one court might decide the same thing, same case one way, other court, makes a different determination. So you can't run scared, but you got to use your gut, and you got to use reality in making these decisions, and not always feel that you are completely tied to following the advice of an attorney. Again, it's advice, it's not a mandate. Anyway, so we had this allergy issue where the parent was really gathering other parents and wanting the district to do more to be proactive about allergy awareness and education. And some of that was valid. The district needed to do that. So we held a public information forum, and that's where you'll see that PowerPoint. The director of food service was there, I was there. Opened it up, put it in newspapers. We had people come in. There weren't a lot, probably 5-10 people. And then we went through our PowerPoints and we asked for input of, what do you think is reasonable? What do you think isn't? And then we would actually show, here's how we would clean a table. Here's the placards. Here's the actual cooler, that would go on a field trip that's marked and things. And it wasn't so people could kind of vote yes or no. It's just that they saw things and they could give input. It actually worked really well. And I would strongly suggest you do that if you have a hot topic, to open it up to a community forum. Just you have rules, and it's not something that's going to determine your policy, but it's going to give input. So one of the things that I remember was a parent coming to a board meeting, the parent, with the child getting stung by a bee on a bus, and presented and said, I worked with local EMS, and I have a drawing of the bus route and the distance from where the EMS dispatches to the bus, and this is how long EMS told me it would take to get there. And then had certain areas that, they said this would be too long and my child be in some pretty severe distress. So, I mean, there's going to be things like that you will encounter as a pupil services director. I mean, people will go through pretty extreme lengths to, actually sometimes work around you and try to work with a school board to get policies written in a certain way. And again, you can advise a school board, but a school board could make a decision, that yes, I mean, we're going to, because of that parent's concern or whatever, maybe they want to put people on every bus, but then they have to figure out how they're going to fund that too. So that I do have a link to the DPI Pupil Non-Discrimination handout. It's good to have that. Provide that to parents. Make sure that your counselors and your staff post these things on your website. The article Mainstreaming versus Inclusion. There's a difference. Mainstreaming is if a child is, think about it, mainstreaming. If you take a child in a wheelchair with a severe cognitive disability and you put them in a regular education classroom and they're present, that's mainstreaming. You can say they're getting some social benefit from it, but whatever, you're not customizing the material for them, and really they are just there in that environment. That is mainstreaming. Inclusion is taking a child, putting them into a regular education environment, having them engaged and having accommodations and modifications so they can participate to some level with the content that's being delivered and socially with peers. So there is a difference between mainstreaming and inclusion, and that's where when districts say we're full inclusion, typically what they are is full mainstreaming. So there's a difference. And also, I like to say that mainstreaming goes along with the word tolerance. And so if you're tolerant of other people, what that means is, you're okay if this person is in the classroom. That's okay with you. If you are acceptance is you want to know about that student, understand that student, their interest, and do efforts to bring them in to the school culture and connectedness. So there is a difference between tolerance and acceptance. All these campaigns to teach tolerance, that's garbage. Tolerance is a minimum threshold. You want to be above that, and you want to have acceptance. Tolerance is walking down the street and someone passes someone of a race that they don't like, for example. I mean, I'm just using this as an example. And tolerance is that they don't say something to that person or get in an argument. Acceptance is walking down and talking to that person, having an understanding of what it means to be of this culture and understand that, and again, it's a completely different level. So this whole thing, teach tolerance, and the way that you use tolerance and non-discrimination and that language, get rid of it, because tolerance is, you want to be better than that. You want to be acceptance. So FERPA. So FERPA involves who has access to information. You have a student with a peanut allergy. So the question will come up and say, who needs access to this? Well, classroom teacher, people in a lunchroom, maybe people out at recess, but who else should you provide that to? Well, I mean, bus driver. Question is, do you provide it to everybody in the school? Because if they see this student, they might, if the student is having a reaction, then they would be aware. Those are questions that you're going to have to answer. Typically, I was pretty broad in sharing that information, and I would work with parents on that too, of saying, if something happens, we want as many people to know, or if a child has, for example, is type 1 diabetic, and have them hopefully wear, a bracelet identifying whatever. But I would rather err on the side of having too many people know that information than not having enough people know that information. And that's a judgment call, and that can come back to bite you sometimes, and I've got bite marks from that. But again, I would lean toward having more people aware of that if they are in a situation where they are going to know that child and see that child. You know, now, obviously, I mean, if you have a school of 1,000 kids or something, you're not going to remember, you know, X, Y, Z. But, you know, if it is a school and, you know, you want to make sure, you know, maybe even the custodians are aware because they're seeing this child and during the school day, and want to make sure after hours too. I mean, school day doesn't end. Clubs, coaches, and things like that. So, but you know, FERPA is one of those things that you're going to have to make a decision on. And again, my personal view is I was really broad on that. So that doesn't mean, you know, you put it out there on a drive for everybody to see. But so 504, in my opinion, is very nebulous. And that's my fellow directors have also said, you know, it's entering the Louisiana swamps at night in a rowboat without any light. So, and it's not a full moon. I mean, you don't exactly know where you're going. 504 is very interpretive. So use the materials that you have, but whether or not, you know, you make 504 accommodations, ultimately comes up to that 504 team. And you'll see some districts will say, you know, if a child has struggles with fine motor and they need 504 so they can improve their handwriting, so then they can participate in the curriculum, they'll write a 504 plan. They don't do an idea, you know, eval, because you can't have just a fine, you know, occupational and physical therapy are related services. They have to be linked to something. They're not standalone services. So you'll see sometimes districts will do this, you know, they'll do 504 plans for handwriting, stuff like that. I was never a fan of that. You know, first of all, I think handwriting should be taught, you know, within the classroom. And you got to be careful though, because look at what your 504 plans are for, and especially how your occupational therapist is being used for 504 plans, and also your physical therapist. One of the things with 504 plans you want to be very aware of is where they are, who's keeping track of them, because I can tell you in a lot of places they're not tracked well. If OCR came to your school and said, I want to see the 504 plans for this building, and you could not produce them in that building, you would be cited. So they need to be centralized in the building, and you can also have them centralized at district office, which you should, but you know, whether that falls upon a school psych or a counselor to do, or you know, you have to have that laid out. And what happens is 504s tend to get neglected, and you know, you discover 504s, oh, there's a 504 in place, I wasn't aware of that. So you know, really look at that system too. And personally, I mean, there's some districts will say, we don't do 504 plans. Well, I mean, you don't have that choice. So just because they're not convenient from a paperwork standpoint, they're harder to track, and they're not as clear, doesn't mean you can't say we're not going to do them. And there are some things you can do without a 504 plan. You can just do, you know, if that's sensory access to the sensory room or sensory breaks for a child or something, you can do that, you know, through a medical note, or you know, through, you could just write that up as a building level plan. I mean, that's not something you need necessarily to do a 504 plan for. Watch out too for perpetual accommodations, or the never-ending IEP. You know, what I mean by that is an 8th grade IEP which looks identical to the 12th grade IEP of a student. So when you provide accommodations, every time you have the IEP meeting, you need to revisit those accommodations and identify if they're still necessary for the student to benefit from schooling. In most cases, you can wean or pull back on those services, and the student will be just fine. And if they're not, you can bring those services back in. For example, you know, the things such as extended time or abbreviated assignment, you know, stuff like that. And a lot of those, you know, they don't really help that much anyway. Extended time. So here's what can happen. Okay, we'll give extended time on assignments that are due and all of a sudden you get to the end of the quarter or the end of a semester, and you've extended things out. So now everything that the student had during that semester is due like right then because you've kept extending it. So now they have 10 assignments to do in a week. So just go back and revisit accommodations. Are they really necessary anymore? You want to work ahead with the parent on some discussion with that and a team. When you bring that up in an IEP meeting and you don't have people on board with you, that's really difficult. Because what people will say is, well, it works now, why do we want to change it? Everything's going fine. Well, the problem is when that child graduates, that level of accommodation isn't going to be there, and it's going to make it difficult for them to be successful. So it's actually, we talk about discrimination. In that case, it does enter the realm of discrimination because you're not giving that child access to the level of academic rigor and independence that they are entitled to. So it's a little bit complicated, but be very aware of perpetual accommodations, and those can actually be discriminatory. That's all I have. This one's a little bit longer, so again, I do appreciate that you take the time to watch these, and they hopefully give you some background and some stories to put things into context. So look forward to seeing you in week 3.